written that book. And he said, Ya Rabb, Allah, give me a belief similar to the old lady of Naysabur. So to prove Allah exists, you don't need anyone to prove it. Allah exists because He created the universe for you. And the second point was talking to Talha. We're not here actually to answer philosophers through philosophy. And in fact, many Muslims were banned from going into philosophy because they just twist the word and twist the thinking, and they make use of a word you never heard of, the word itself, to know how they used it. So we were not trying to answer philosophers. We were not taking point by point. We're just highlighting that there's a lot of answers in the Quran which will suit the believer. And you need to be a believer to actually benefit from the Quran. We said this before. You're not going to benefit from the Quran unless you are a believer. You're not going to, the Quran is not going to prove to you Allah exists. You need to believe Allah exists. And Allah said, okay, you exist, you believe.
فطرة isn't it? فطرة.
So we'll go through the we might chop the last end of it, which is the moral values.
Moral values is important. Moral values.
Yeah, might have to. We'll see how it goes. Might have to.
Where do they come from?
Come back again for it. So this is the probability, a short video. Probability of a single protein formed by itself, by chance.
When applied to the origin of life and the random formation of large biomolecules, probability theory clarifies the limitations of chance as a creative agent on the primordial Earth. For example, what are the odds a single protein could form exclusively through the blind interactions of chemistry? Our target is one smaller than average molecule made from 150 amino acids, each aligned to ensure a folded chain. Researchers have calculated that on the ancient Earth, the probability of success was 1 chance in 10 to the 164th power. That's one correctly sequenced protein chain for every 100 million trillion 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 failed attempts. But despite these enormous odds, some theorists argue that given enough time, anything is possible. Okay, let's test the validity of this opinion. We'll begin by establishing an ideal environment for chemical evolution, an imaginary world that will provide chance with every opportunity to succeed. First, we stock the oceans to capacity with amino acids. That means all the atoms on Earth, including its entire supply of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, and sulfur, are available to form 10 to the 41st complete sets of the 20 types of amino acids used to build proteins. Then we'll alter the laws of nature to protect these building blocks from the destructive rays of ultraviolet light and chemical contamination in the primordial soup. Now let's turn the chemistry loose and see what happens. The amino acids start bonding furiously. In our experiment, an entire chain of 150 units self-assembles in only 1 second. Since all 20 types of amino acids are available, at the majority of sites, there is a 5% or 1 in 20 chance the correct molecule will align in the chain. If the sequencing is incorrect, the chain is immediately destroyed and a new assembly begins. Throughout the planet, 6,000 million billion trillion attempts will take place every minute. That means in 4.6 billion years, the oldest estimated age of the Earth, the number of chains that don't fold will exceed 10 to the 58th power. It's a staggering total, but nowhere near 10 to the 164th. The trials necessary, on average, to build a protein of 150 amino acids by chance. So if undirected chemistry can't produce our coveted molecule during the entire history of the Earth, then how much time would have been needed? To find out, let's take a road trip.
I'll show you another video.
That's good. Are we finishing that?
The origin of life is a much debated topic. Some have dedicated their lives to finding an answer. Others write the question off as unanswerable. Just what is the probability of life occurring? It has become abundantly clear that the Earth is the only place where life exists in our solar system. All the other planetary bodies have been explored to one extent or another without revealing the existence of a single organic molecule. Well, how many Earths might be out there in the galaxy and the galaxies beyond our own? What is the probability of finding life outside of the Earth? Probability is a field of mathematics that assesses the likelihood of an event occurring. Mathematics is a good predictor, and given enough information, it can accurately predict the possibility of an event occurring, whether an election result, life expectancy of a population, or the likelihood of one purchasing a certain item. Traditionally, people under the influence of religion have viewed life on Earth as the product of a deliberate and planned creation. Others explain the presence of life through a slow process of development or evolution, which presently seems to be the most widely accepted point of view. Well, how do mathematicians assess the probability of evolution? The development of life represents the coming together of various molecules to form more organized and complex forms. That is, the development of life requires things moving from less order to more order. To evaluate the likelihood of this possibility, mathematicians would first consider the second thermodynamic law, called the law of entropy. Evolutionary thought is predicated on the premise that matter can move to a higher state of order. Mathematics holds an opposite view. Dr. W.H. Thorpe, professor of animal ethology at Cambridge University, wrote this: "The likelihood of life occurring by chance is fantastically improbable. The spontaneous formation of life violates the second thermodynamic law, which states that all closed physical systems, such as the Earth, tend toward a state of maximum disorder." Let me give a simple example of probability. If you had a single die, the likelihood of rolling a 1 is 1 out of 6. If you had a 10-sided die, the likelihood of rolling a 1 is 1 out of 10. In order to show this, let's first express chances in a different way. We know that if your chances are 1 out of 100, that can be written as 1 over 100, or 1 over 10 to the power of 2, 2 representing 2 zeros. 1 out of a million can be written as 1 over 10 to the power of 6, because there are 6 zeros. In mathematics, if the chances of something occurring are smaller than 1 over 10 to the power of 50, we generally say the chances of that event are nil. That is, it will not occur. That's because 1 over 10 to the 50th, or 10 to the 50th, represents a number that is far greater than the estimated number of planets in the entire universe. In that light, we can look at the statement from Dr. Jean Morton. The odds that a single large protein molecule can develop by chance are 1 over 10 to the power of 113. He goes on to say that the chances of the natural development of the 25,000 enzymes that make up the human body are 1 over 10 to the power of 2,825,000. To put it another way, former astrophysicist and the head of mathematics of Wales University, Dr. Wickramasinghe, and Sir Fred Hoyle described the likelihood of human evolution to be as mathematically plausible as a tornado blowing through a junkyard and leaving behind a complete and flyable Boeing 747. These men I have quoted are some of the most respected mathematicians on the planet. They are not religious nutcases. They have looked without prejudice at the notion that life evolved by chance from non-life and has progressed through natural selection into the complex forms we have today, and they've come to the same conclusion. To accept evolution, one must first accept that the impossible happened. I'm Stuart Vahavich for Tomorrow's World Viewpoint.
Right, now there's more difficult topic we're going to discuss. What God looks like. Does that make you the light you want switched on, or you're happy with it? Obviously, we're assuming that the philosopher talking the truth, because some of the things he said, even philosophers say no. So obviously, everybody talks about his own thoughts and things. But this is associate professor in Miami, in university in Miami, so more likely to get, a lot of things correct from the philosopher point of view. Obviously, I'm not a philosopher to actually say that.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace, share your passion with the world.
We've spent quite a bit of time looking at arguments for God's existence, but we haven't said much yet about this God. Like, what's he like? Is he a he? Is he like strictly Marvel superheroes, or is he more of a DC guy? Does he prefer his salsa with or without cilantro? I like corn. Who's his favorite crystal gem from Steven Universe? I guess those kinds of questions would only apply to a heavily personalized and anthropomorphic God. But the traditional picture of God, the one accepted and even assumed throughout Judeo-Christian tradition up into modern times, is what we might call an omni-God, possessing particular divine attributes, the characteristics believed to be held by God. Now let's pause for a moment to acknowledge that this discussion is of one particular God, the one who stars in Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scriptures. Of course, lots of people believe in lots of other gods, and they all have attributes of their own. We're focusing on this God because he's the one all of the philosophers we've been studying were talking about. He's the one they believed or didn't believe in. Philosophers like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, who were themselves influenced by the writings of Plato and Aristotle, came up with a general set of divine attributes that are still widely held among today's theists. And in this view, God is omniscient, which means that he knows everything that can be known, and he's also omnipotent, or all-powerful. He's been said to be omnibenevolent, or possessing perfect goodness, and he's omnitemporal and omnipresent, meaning he exists at all places and all times at once. Now, it's worth noting that none of these attributes is actually mentioned in the Bible, but philosophers like Aquinas reasoned that they must be the case if God is perfect, and these philosophers took it as given that he is. The problem is, a close investigation of these attributes reveals some rather tricky little puzzles. No, I take that back. They are really, really big puzzles. Can God create a rock so heavy he can't lift it? Is just one of an infinite number of unanswerable questions that can be asked about God. Like, if God is omnipotent, he has to be able to create something so heavy he can't lift it. Otherwise, his inability to create it would mean that there's at least one thing he couldn't do. But then he wouldn't be omnipotent, because if he were truly all-powerful, he'd be able to lift anything. Quandaries like this come up all the time when you consider the divine attributes. And some of the questions that arise are not only about God, but also about us. For instance, if God knows everything, then he also knows the future, right? Which makes sense if he's also omnitemporal, because that would mean that he's already in the future, and also in the past. And don't forget the present. But many theists also believe that God gave us free will. So how can we be free if God already knows what we're gonna do? In that case, are we really free, or is freedom just an illusion that he created for us to make us feel like we're in control? What we're seeing here is that, at least on the surface, God's traditional divine attributes are internally inconsistent, meaning they can't all be true at the same time. And what do you do if you hold inconsistent beliefs? Well, if you're being philosophically rational, you either give some of them up, or you figure out a way to understand them that makes them consistent. This is what a theist who believes in the omni-God has to do. Let's think about the contradiction that arises from believing the following propositions. 1, God is omniscient. 2, humans have free will. Is there any way to resolve this contradiction, or do we have to surrender one of those beliefs? One possible response is to say that knowledge knowledge and causation aren't the same thing. So God might know that we're going to do something without actually causing us to do it. This actually makes sense if you think about it. Imagine a person standing on a cliff looking down at a train track that curves around a bend. From her vantage point, the onlooker can see that just on the other side of the bend, a person is stuck on the track as the train approaches. Too far away to do anything, the onlooker knows the accident will happen before it does, but the fact that she knows it will happen doesn't mean that she caused it to happen. To use a less gruesome example, if God knew you were going to eat an entire pecan pie by yourself over the course of a lonely weekend, that doesn't mean that he caused you to do it. That was all on you. But wait, if God is omniscient, then he can't be wrong, can he? Because if he was ever wrong, then there would have been something he didn't know. So if God knew you were going to eat the whole pie, then you couldn't not eat the pie, because if you decided not to at the last minute, then you would have just proven God wrong, thereby single-handedly stripping him of his divine omniscience. Good job. So the knowledge and power of God are, to say the least, philosophically perplexing. Now let's consider another question about God's personal skill set. Can God sin? If he's omnipotent, it would seem that he can, because he can do anything, but if he's omnibenevolent, or inherently good, then it would seem that he can't. This doctrine, which says that God can't sin, is known as divine impeccability. But if God is impeccable and incapable of sin, then doesn't that mean that he is not omnipotent? After all, I can sin easily. I mean, give me 5 minutes, I could probably break like 2 or 3 commandments, like the ones about coveting stuff, not the murdery ones. Still, it seems kind of weird to think that I can do something that God can't. Some people try to solve this particular puzzle by saying that sin is necessarily a failure, so therefore a perfect being can't do it. Others say that even though God might do something that would be a sin if a human did it, the idea of sin simply doesn't apply to God, perhaps because given his omnibenevolence, everything that God does is inherently good. Now, many philosophers find this solution troubling because it kind of makes God's goodness vacuous. After all, it basically means that saying God did a thing would be the same thing as saying God did a good thing, because ipso facto anything God does is good. And if that's the case, then his goodness doesn't have any real meaning. Yet another possible contradiction presents itself in the belief that the omni-God is also a personal God. Many people find it difficult to suppose that God could be omnitemporal and omniscient, yet still have a personal relationship with his creatures. It's hard to understand how God could relate to us or feel the way we feel if he doesn't experience time as we do. If he already knows what's going to happen, how could he ever be surprised or change his mind? And if God is omnitemporal, is it even possible that he could be moved to respond to prayers? Let's look at this idea up close in this week's Flash Philosophy. To the thought bubble. When people talk about praying for something to happen or to not happen, or are otherwise making a request of God, they're making what are known as petitionary prayers. When you pray in this way, you're asking God for something, to help you pass a test, or to save a loved one who's in danger, or to make sure the Patriots win the game. Contemporary American philosopher Eleanor Stump argues that we have no reason to think that asking God for something would actually make a difference. She thinks about it like this: if God knows everything, including the future, which he does if he's omniscient, and if God has the power to bring about any state of affairs, which he does if he's omnipotent, and if he always wants to bring about the best state of affairs, which he does if he's omnibenevolent, then God has already decided what's going to happen in every single case, to everyone, always. So either your prayer is asking God to do something he was already going to do, in which case your prayer was kind of a waste of time, or your prayer is asking God to do something he's already decided not to do because it wasn't actually the best thing. Sorry, Patriots. And in that case, even if God would change his mind based on your prayer, you wouldn't want him to, because it would actually make things worse than they would have been if you just let God do his thing. In other words, if God knows what's best, why would you want to change his mind? Now, Stump suggests that there might be some value in the asking, even if the prayer doesn't actually change what's going to happen. Maybe you agree with her. But at this point, it should be clear just how many problems there are in the divine attributes when you think about them. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Thomas Aquinas, the thinker who's largely responsible for the traditional divine attributes we think of today, responded to these sorts of puzzles by saying that all the speculation of what God is like is just analogical predication. Basically, Aquinas said that we can't predicate or assert anything about God because he's so far beyond our understanding. When we speak of God, Aquinas said, we never really say anything that's true. Instead, we have to speak entirely in analogies because that's all we can do. So God isn't literally our father, for example, but we can understand his role for us as being father-like because that's as close as we can get to really understanding what he is. Or think of it this way: people in South Florida might say it's cold when the temperature dips into the 50s, but in Alaska it's not cold until it's well below zero. But both of those frames of reference are more similar to each other than they are to the cold that is absolute zero, which is about negative 273 degrees Celsius. You might even say that absolute zero cold and negative 10 degree cold are not even the same thing, but we use that one word, cold, cold to describe them both as a kind of analogical way of talking about something that defies our complete and personal understanding. So Aquinas basically said not to worry about all of these puzzles because none of these things we say about God is more than an approximation, a little analog that our tiny little minds can come up with so that we can talk about an infinite being. Now, there are other thinkers, particularly in modern times, who point out that none of the traditional divine attributes are in the Bible anyway, so maybe God isn't an omni-God. Maybe he's more like a superhero. He can be way smarter than us, way more powerful than us, way more good than us, but still not perfect. This seems like a sacrilege to a lot of people, but some philosophers argue that it's more compatible with the God of the Bible. After all, in the Bible we see God doing very human things, like walking in the garden, getting angry, being surprised, and changing his mind. So it could be possible that God actually does hate cilantro or is a big fan of amethyst. That's the kind of stuff that we, as philosophers, get to ponder kindly and thoughtfully in the comments. Today, we learned about the traditional divine attributes omnipotence, omniscience, omnitemporality, and omnibenevolence, and the puzzles that they create for our understanding of God. We also explored some possible solutions to those puzzles, from Aquinas' ideas of analogical predication to the work of Eleanor Stump. This episode...
Right, okay, we just have to tackle one by one. And as I said, we're not answering in a philosophical way. We're just getting from the Quran what could be an answer to these queries. So if you take the one, Allah knows all things. Obviously, Allah Azza wa Jal said in the Quran, أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ. Doesn't Allah knows everything He created? And He is the most wise and the most experienced and the most delicate, or here, most kind. So Allah created everything. He knows all what He created at all the times and every time. When you spoke about gender, obviously Allah laysa kamithlihi shay. You cannot compare to Allah anything. You can't say Allah male or female or anything. You don't. He is the creator. He is unimaginable. You cannot imagine Him being male, female, or no gender, nothing. You just don't talk about this. Can God sin? Obviously, sin happens when you refuse the order of Allah. So Allah Azza wa Jal said, وَلَا يَظْلِمُ رَبُّكَ أَحَدًا. Allah doesn't unjustly treat anyone. And Allah Azza wa Jal said in the Quran, لَا يَسْأَلُ عَمَّا يَفْعَلُ وَهُمْ يُسْأَلُونَ. No, Allah will not be asked about what He does, and you will be asked. So the sin itself, when Allah gives an order, you disobey the order, you are a sinner. Doesn't apply to Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah doesn't receive orders from anybody. Allah gives the order, nobody questions Allah Azza wa Jal. And Allah stated, وَلَا يَظْلِمُ رَبُّكَ أَحَدًا. He doesn't unjustly treat anyone anyway. And He's the most wise.
This also shows that he's not created, he's out of the creation.
Yeah, he's the one who set the law.
Right.
So Allah Azza wa Jal said, قال أطيعوا الله والرسول فإن تولوا فإن الله لا يحب الكافرين. So those who don't obey Allah Azza wa Jal, they are kafirin. Obey Allah and His Messenger, and if you turn away from Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah doesn't like the kafirin. The kafirin are those who disobey Allah Azza wa Jal. Now, وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَيَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَهُ يَدْخُلْهُ نَارًا. Whoever disobey Allah and His Messenger and curse the boundaries of Allah, Allah will enter him hellfire for eternity, and he will have a severe, humiliating punishment. But now look at these things, because this is probably you're not aware of. If somebody, Allah Azza wa Jalla said in the Day of Judgment, يَوْمَئِذٍ لَا يُسْأَلُ عَنْ ذَنْبِهِ إِنسٌ وَلَا جَانٌ. Which means if somebody doesn't believe in Allah Azza wa Jalla, there's no sins below that. The sins, if you believe in Allah Azza wa Jalla and you disobey Him in A, B, C, you are a sinner. You ask Allah to forgive you, Allah forgives you. If somebody doesn't believe in Allah Azza wa Jalla, he's to hellfire straight away. There's no question asked. Because no point asking question while he's going to hell straight away. It's like if somebody kills 100 people and went to court, convicted of murder and sent for execution, for death penalty. And on the way somebody said, my lord, my judge, he stole my pencil in the school. Will Allah, is that a sin? That's not a sin, you will not repeat the hearing because of the pencil. He killed 100 people and he is convicted and he's going to be executed. There's no point to look into these small sins, whether he stole a car, or whether he broke a window, whether he even killed somebody. That's irrelevant sin comparing to disbelieving in Allah Azza wa Jal. So the Day of Judgment, لا يسأل عن ذنبه, any other sin will be irrelevant. If he doesn't believe in Allah Azza wa Jal, he's going to hell. Forget about the sins. He's not going to be.
That's the argument against the atheists.
This is what you're saying. Yeah, if somebody doesn't believe in Allah Azza wa Jal, it's like if you go to London, you will see quite a lot of diplomatic cars parking by the railway line. They don't care about the law in Britain because they are not subject to the law. You can go to any of your embassy, if you have an embassy, you can go there, bring him out, cut him into pieces, dissolve him in acid, and the law of the land doesn't apply on you. So this is what they thought, obviously. The other point which he said, if Allah knows the future, and He knows you're going to eat a pie, and you don't eat a quarter of it, have you defeated Allah? Now that was a big challenge from the time of all the prophets, and came the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and Allah said in the Quran, in Mecca, early in Mecca, تبت يدا أبي لهب وتب ما أغنى عنه ماله وما كسب سيصلى نارا ذات لهب وامرأته حمالة الحطب في جيدها حبل من مسد. So Allah said that Abu Lahab will go to hellfire and his wife, early in Mecca, year 3 or 4, or even before that. For 10 years, Abu Lahab never came out to prove the Quran wrong and said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. He could have done, he never did it. And he died as kafir, and he is going to hellfire. And his wife actually came to challenge the Prophet ﷺ, how dare you say about my husband, and she came, and Prophet ﷺ was standing with Abu Bakr, and Abu Bakr said, I don't want you to listen to this filthy lady. She's really have very sharp tongue and she's horrible. He said to him, don't worry, she will not see me. And she came, and she didn't see Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and she saw Abu Bakr. Where's your friend? And Abu Bakr was positive next to him, and he's smiling, and she can't see him. He said, why? He said, oh, how dare he say this about my husband? So when Allah proved in front of Abu Bakr and the Prophet ﷺ that his wife is as bad as him, he sent the following verses, وَامْرَأَتُهُ حَمَّالَةَ الْحَطَبِ. He added her. فِي جِيدِهَا حَبْلٌ مِّن مَّسَدٍ. And she didn't say, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. Now you go to another ayah, سيقول السفهاء من الناس ما ولاهم عن القبلة. When Allah changed the Qibla, Allah said in the Quran, tomorrow you will find people saying, why they changed the Qibla? And the Quran was read, and the Muslim read the Quran, and these idiot people came out and said, why they changed the Qibla? If they were clever enough, they would have said, oh, we're not going to say it. The Quran wrong. We haven't said it. But they said it. They said it. So Allah said, it will happen, it will happen. Even you know it's going to happen, they did not stop saying, سيقول السفهاء. Eating the full pie again. Allah said in Mecca, سيهزم الجمع ويولون الدبر. That those kafirin in Mecca, they will be defeated and run away. And Umar ibn Khattab in Mecca said, what jama'? What group? How would they be defeated? We're hiding, they're killing us, they're torturing us, we're running away to Ethiopia to escape death and things. Which army will be defeated? Years passed, the Prophet ﷺ went to Medina, they came after him, they won, the Prophet won in Badr, and they lost the war in Badr, and they ran away. The same ayah, they could have said, no, we're not going to fight them, the ayah is wrong, we're not going to be defeated, we're not going to involve in any fight, but they were. And Allah said about Walid ibn al-Mughira, سَنَسِمُهُ عَلَى الْخُرْطُومِ, we will chop his nose off. And he was so arrogant in Mecca. Years passed, Badr took place, he was killed, his nose was chopped. And they came to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they said, he was dead in so-and-so place. His nose was chopped, we were surprised. He said, what's it? Come and show me. And they went, and he went and he saw the guy with the nose chopped. He said, Ashhadu anni Rasulullah. Allah said it in the Quran. Walid ibn Mughira could have stayed in Mecca, could have run away. But he came to have his nose chopped. More than that, غُلِبَتِ الرُّومِ, and that was challenge. The Rome lost the war, and Allah said in the Quran, they will win. The war might not happen. They might say, no, we're not going to do the war. The war happened, and the Roman won the war against the Persian. And the Prophet ﷺ was correct, the Quran was correct. So the buy, Allah said it will be eaten, it was eaten. They were able not to, but they did it. We were in a meeting in Birmingham with a group of Jews, and I said to them, you can prove the Quran wrong now. Now you can prove the Quran wrong. He said, how? I said, there is this ayah. لا تجدن أشد الناس عداوة للذين آمنوا واليهود والذين أشركوا. You find the Jew the most enmity towards the believers and those who are associating partner with Allah. And I said to them, you can prove the Quran wrong. You go to the Palestinians and say, we love you. Take Palestine. Here, we love you. Your Quran is wrong. We love you. The Quran is right. We'll stay. That's a current challenge. It's not like, an old challenge. It's living challenge. The future events will prayer and dua change the plan of Allah Azza wa Jal. Now, this is the most difficult thing to understand as a human. We are human. Allah is the creator. Allah is God. We are human. We are created with a law binding our life. We can't apply it to Allah. Allah already knows the future and He wrote it after it happened. Don't think Allah wrote the future before it happened. Allah wrote the future after it happened. Yes, Allah wrote it in the past. Allah in the past, in the present, in the future at the same time.
But you didn't answer that red question. Will dua change the qadr of Allah? Okay.
So in Allah عنده علم الساعة وينزل الغيث
Sorry.
ويعلم ما في الأرحام. Allah wrote what happened already. Yeah, it's already happened to Him. He's in the future looking back and He wrote it. It happened. For us, it hasn't happened. We are walking towards the future. He's already in the future looking back. Now, in Allah عنده علم الساعة وينزل الغيب ويعلم ما في الأرحام وما تدري نفس ماذا تكسب غدا وما تدري نفس بأي أرض تموت. Allah has all these knowledge. He's already written it. Where you are going to die, when the day of judgment is going to happen, when these children are going to be born, where, whatever, and with Him.
You think the reference
وينزل الغيث.
What's the reference for this? Do you know offhand? Which
It's in the end of Surah Luqman. Dua, Allah knows your plan. You don't know His plan. Allah will do what's best for you if you consult Him. And remember, God created our physical law, including time, and these laws do not apply to Allah Azza wa Jalla. Mind you, the philosopher were talking about Jesus as being God, so they have symbolized God is in the body, whether it's Jesus or God the Father, God the Son. In their mind, that's the way it works. Now, ويستعجلونك بالعذاب ولن يخلف الله وعده وإن يوما عند ربك كألف سنة مما تعدون. One day in the eye of Allah Azza wa Jalla equal to 1,000 years of our years. And then Allah Azza wa Jalla start talking about the relativity. Time to you is different than time to Allah. What's equal to 1,000 years of your time, it's one day in the eye of Allah Azza wa Jalla. Allah is not bound by any time or space. Now, we were talking yesterday, or the day before in the study second, if you live near a black hole for 1 hour, will be equal to 7 million years on this planet. So if you go there for 1 hour and you come back, you find the Earth past 7 million years. So time has a lot to do with the speed, and so is the space as well. So
you can't say that the laws of physics apply to God, can you?
No, you don't. But look, I'm trying to bring to you that human now start accepting the fact that the time, past, present, future exists at the same time. Now here, 1 day equal to 50,000 years. Now, when you go to the physicists and how they look into the time now,
Once upon a time, that magical phrase at the beginning of every good story.
let's switch off the light.
But what is the story of time? People say that time flies, that time is money. We waste time. We kill time. We try to save time. But what do we really know about time? Well, like this river, time seems to flow endlessly from one moment to the next. And the flow of time seems to always be in one direction, toward the future. But that may not be right. Discoveries over the last century have shown that much of what we think about time may be nothing more than an illusion. Contrary to everyday experience, time may not flow at all. Our past may not be gone. Our future may already exist. It turns out, time itself can speed up or slow down. And events that we think can unfold in only one direction can also unfold in reverse. But how could this be? How could we be so wrong about something so familiar? And if time isn't what we all think it is, then what is it? Did it have a beginning? Will it have an end? Where did it come from? Most people view time in a pretty simple, straightforward way. Time ticks the same for everyone, everywhere. It's a common sense picture established by the father of modern science, Isaac Newton.
Time for Isaac Newton is something that is an immutable property of the universe. Time always changes at the same rate.
Time just goes along, and there's really nothing we can do about it.
Sensible as Newton's picture of time may seem, Einstein realized it wasn't right. He discovered that time could run at different rates. Strange as it sounds, this means that time for me may not be the same as time for you. Einstein's discovery smashed Newton's conception of reality.
Before Einstein, our understanding of time was basically due to Newton, and it aligned with our intuition. Time in the mathematics of Newton is pretty much time as we experience it. When Einstein came along, that all changed. Einstein came up with a number of theories. The first, the special theory of relativity, he developed in 1905 in what perhaps is best